Today's deep dive looks at the state of doping and PED regulation across sports. We'll look at it through the lens of an emerging scandal in tennis. But before the deep dive, our quick five. Number one, Stephen A. Smith is weighing into politics again this week. Two, would you want Aaron Rodgers as your team's quarterback? Three, the U.S.-Canadian hockey rivalry is hitting a new level, and hockey is showing us all how to do an all-star game properly. Four, why does the NBA All-Star Game suck now, and how do we make it not suck? And then finally, five, baseball is coming back. I'm Jason Kander, and I'm joined by Ravi Gupta, and in a few minutes, Addisu Demisi. Welcome back to The Game Within, where we talk about the business and politics of sports and how each shapes what happens on the field.
Well, let's start with story number one, Jason, which is Stephen A. Smith. This thing is real. He went on Pod Save America. It's the equivalent of, a candidate going to Iowa. At this point, it's which you've done before, fueling speculation of your run back in the day. And Stephen A. Smith, he's leaning into this. He went on Pod Save America and talked about Trump and how Trump is using sports to get the message out. Let's go to the clip.
Donald Trump is using sports in a really smart way politically. I think he went to college football games and UFC fights during the campaign. He went to the Super Bowl. He did a loop around the track of the Daytona 500 in his limo over the weekend. It feels like he's creating a bond with these audiences that Democrats don't have. And how do you think Democrats can be a part of that conversation? I can't think of anyone who would go to a game, like except for Barack Obama going to NBA games because he genuinely loved the sport. But like, who else?
This is why I'm a candidate. I don't want to be. And that's why I am one. Because you see, I wouldn't go to the Daytona 500, but I'd have been at the Super Bowl. I'd have been at the hockey All-Star game. I'd have been at NBA All-Star weekend. I'd be at the World Series. I'd be at All-Star weekend for baseball. I mean, the list goes. I'd be at a boxing match. I'd be at a UFC match, et cetera, et cetera. The point is, you're a politician. You're supposed to be able to do what the people want you to do as a politician.
This is why I'm a candidate.
Yeah, okay. I caught the exact same thing. You go first.
Well, I find this interesting because if you were following the standard playbook, which I'm glad nobody hopefully is following anymore, you never say those words until you make a moment out of it, right?
It literally invokes a legal, it's. I spent a year pretty much running for president and never said I'm running. I had to say all this stuff about, if I run and I'm thinking about it. But there's actual, I don't know that it matters with the FEC not mattering much.
We don't have laws anymore, Jason.
Yeah, I don't know that it matters. But anyway, also, I guess what he's trying to say is like, I've been made a candidate by others.
Yeah, but I think it might have been a Freudian slip. It's also beyond the legalities of it. You want to, under the traditional rules of communications, you want to save that statement for a big moment where you bring all the media out, you do it in prime time on a Thursday, and you announce, like in Springfield, Illinois, like Obama did February 10th, 2007, that he was running for president, right? And Stephen A. Smith is clearly not doing that. And, it could be just him just kind of speaking off the cuff. It could be just a general approach that he's going to take. He could just be having fun with this, or he could really be testing the waters. And I'm leaning towards the latter.
Yeah, I think he is testing the waters. I think it's one of those times where the fact that he doesn't know what the usual rules of proceeding as a political candidate are is very helpful to him because it doesn't sound like one. But on the other hand, it can mean that there are traps. What doesn't seem to be the case, and maybe I'm wrong, is I don't think he has gone so far as probably to hire anybody. I'm sure that there are no shortage of political strategists who see an enormous paycheck in this and who are banging down his door like crazy. But, he clearly doesn't have anybody there saying, like, you can say this, you can't say that. And I think he is rightfully, I would imagine, going to go a couple of years. If he does run, I would say he could go a couple of years without wading into any real issues and just continue to kind of talk smack. Don't you think?
Totally. Now, the question of like the gatekeepers, right? This is actually what I'm doing. I got this fellowship at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard that I just started, where the main question I'm asking is, what's the future of communications directors? And my working thesis is that they need to shift from being the people to say no all the time, which is what a lot of, they're like, stay on message, avoid controversy, to people who find ways to say yes more often. Like, that's my main thesis about what these comms directors need to be, which is actually finding more venues, more provocative ways to get yourself out there, more ways to capture attention, as opposed to just trying to avoid controversy constantly, which is how we've been training communications directors on both sides of the aisle for a long time.
Well, it's interesting. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, and so he makes me think of that.
Well, what he's talking about there, he's sitting there talking to Tommy Vitor, and they're talking about the fact that Trump goes to cultural events and inserts himself into everything, which, I mean, Stephen A. Smith being on Pod Save America right after Trump takes office, or a few weeks after, is a literal example of that, right? I mean, it is the current king of sports talk going to one of the like most watched places you can go for Democratic political talk. So, I mean, he's doing that right now, but also the point he's making, that, you know, you're a politician, you gotta go do these things. I guess what he means is just, you gotta go to where people's attention already is. And I think that's really true. And I remember a long time ago, and this is like true across media training, whether it's political, whether it's sports, like we talked about last week. When you go onto a show that people watch regularly, you have to demonstrate that you are chummy with the host. And if you do that, it's like you're being welcomed into people's living room, or if it's a podcast, into their AirPods. And then you're within their circle. And that's what's going, you know, the big debate over should Kamala have gone on Joe Rogan or not, just comes down to, you know, people. I think your point is Democratic, you know, communications directors take it as, oh, but you open up a lot of liabilities, a lot of vulnerabilities. But at the same time, now you're going into a place where you could be within the circle of trust for people who are watching or listening to that show. And that's what Stephen A. is doing. And that part of the process is trying to get people to think, well, maybe he could be this thing, so that he can explore the option, I guess.
Well, let's go to another clip, and then we'll send Stephen A. off for the week. I guess this will be a recurring segment for us, is what Stephen A. is up to. But one more clip here.
The first order of business is finding a candidate that recognizes the importance of appealing to not only his own constituency, but those who are undecided, and playing to win. If you're a centrist, what you're saying is, I'm willing to compromise. I'm willing to walk across the aisle and work with people. I'm not interested in all of this chaos. If it has to get chaotic, so be it. But that's not the objective. That's not the goal. We're Americans. We can come together. We can work together. Don't look at black, white, Latino, Asian, you know, whatever the case may be. Don't look at all of that stuff and think that that's a license to dismiss and alienate others just because they don't look nor feel like you do. You might have a shot at convincing them if you talk to them. You could go to them and talk to them about what their desires are, what they wish for their communities, what's the kind of thing that plagues their community, and how we can alleviate those concerns. That's your responsibility. And see, to me, I'm sitting there again. I have no desire to be in politics. Zero. My life is pretty good. My life is pretty damn good. But guess what? I'm looking at it and I'm saying, this isn't hard.
So I have some news for Stephen A. Smith. I'm half with him. I was nodding along to that very last sentence.
Right. It's
yeah. Well, what he needs is, you know, I think he needs a precocious Ivy Leaguer who's going to put those white papers out for him. Jason, do you know anybody?
yeah. There's only one on here, and it's you.
We need to start. What I think he needs, honestly, he needs to surprise people on the things that they would be worried about with him, right? So, like, if he's between now and the election, the questions are going to come eventually: lack of substance, lack of experience, and all that. And he's got to get out there and surprise people with cogent explanations on things just to check the box. Nobody's going to vote for Stephen A. Smith because he's a policy visionary. But I think what they need to be is like, oh, wow, like Stephen A. Smith, like this guy with the hot take on, you know, whether LeBron is better than Jordan, actually has a hot take on what to do with our school system. Okay, I'm listening now. And I think that's going to be the next generation for him, the next iteration. And it doesn't need to come today, but it'll have to come eventually. The other thing is he needs somebody in his ear saying, look, man, this shit is going to be really hard.
Yes.
And here's how hard it's going to really be.
Oh, how many people have we seen who have been world beaters in some other arena show up and say, I mean, and you name the arena, the corporate world, maybe they were huge entrepreneurs. I've seen myself, I get contacted by them a lot of guys who came out of the military at a very, and gals at a very high level. And they're like, well, how hard could this be? And it's hard. I mean, particularly if you start out at the highest level, like, as they like to say, the pitches come in pretty fast at that level.
Yes.
And so if you haven't started at a lower level, it's not saying you have to, he's clearly very talented, but the good thing is, and we'll move on from this now, but I will say he's got 2 years to really figure, not just like learn the issues, figure out what he thinks about them,
Yes.
so that he can make the arguments in 2 years if he wants to do it.
I think if we're sizing him up, like almost like a prospect, right? Here's what I think Smith's perspective is that he's got going for him is he's got stamina. And it's stamina in his particular domain, but he has the most stamina of any person who's ever been on TV I've ever seen, where he gets on and he could talk for hours on his own with full energy and do it all day long. And the good news for him is campaigning is more and more about being in front of a screen. So he's going to be able to get away with a lot more just doing the things that he's good at.
That's true.
Than any candidate before. What he's going to have to get used to, obviously the in-person retail and all that is still going to matter. He's going to have to get used to that, but he's going to really have to get used to people attacking him personally. And I'm sure he's gotten that kind of scrutiny, but there is nothing, as you know, even remotely close to the kind of stuff that's going to come his way now. And that's really what he's going to have to get used to.
Yeah. Well, this will be interesting. I mean, it's like this podcast came along at the perfect time for this crossover event. So, all right, What's next?
All right. Well, second story of the day. Speaking of sports figures who've dabbled in politics, our boy Aaron Rodgers is, officially or maybe unofficially no longer a New York Jet. Last week, the New York Jets met with Rodgers, and in their statement, they said they shared their intention to move in a different direction at quarterback, and that's from Aaron Glenn and GM Darren Mauhi. And they said, quote, "It was important to have this discussion now to provide clarity and enable each of us the proper time to plan for our respective futures. We want to thank him for the leadership, passion, and dedication he brought to the organization and wish him success moving forward." Let's go to a clip from Ian Rappaport in which he talks a little bit about what the real justification for all of this could have been.
First of all, I don't think the Jets really care that he's on the Pat McAfee show, honestly. Probably just affects the PR department. Doesn't really affect anyone else. It's New York. There are plenty of distractions elsewhere. It was really more like, well, if you go on that, could you maybe use a little more discretion? And they can't tell him to show up to OTAs. That's not allowed, but it's like, we'd like you to be around more. And it really seemed like over the course of several discussions, Aaron Glenn, the new head coach, and Darren Muji and Aaron Rodgers all became clear this was just not the direction to go. And I think by the time that they had Aaron Rodgers come to New Jersey and really talk face-to-face, it was clear from both sides, that this was not going to work. So they are all moving on. Certainly, you mentioned it, Baldy, smart decision by the Jets, and we'll see where Aaron Rodgers lands, if he lands.
Well, let's review some of this off the field controversy, and then we can talk about, whether you would want Aaron Rodgers to be your quarterback, given this sort of thing. So let's go to this little highlight clip that Philip made of some of Rodgers' greatest hits over the last couple of years.
I was just like, no, I'd love to see Joe Biden give an interview where he can speak on the history of the United States in the same way that Putin talked about the history of his country.
I mean, listen, Mr. Pfizer said he didn't think he would be in a vax war with me.
Oh, boy.
Didn't think he'd be in a vax war with me. This ain't a war, homie. This is just conversation. But if you want to have some sort of duel, debate, have me on the podcast. Come on the show. Let's have a conversation.
Oh!
Well, there's ideas that some of the noises from the dolphins when they're lovemaking, the frequency of that is actually healing to the body. So
So you're just sticking that Achilles up, sitting on your back porch, just
Go ahead and hump your way into whistling into
Yep.
my Achilles getting healed. That's,
Proceed. Go ahead. Mentioned ivermectin being horse-based and pushed that whole narrative for a long time. He gave a platform to one of the biggest spreaders of misinformation during the COVID times, Dr. Fauci. So in my opinion,
jeez.
he ripped me about the vax, and that turns out to be an L on many occasions, because the vax was not safe and effective like we were told that it was in the beginning. There are a lot of injuries now that we've seen related to the vaccine. So in my opinion, you went after me. That's fine. You're a comedian. Go for it. Not offended, but that was an L.
Okay, so I can see where that would be a distraction from the quarterbacking. The thing about it is, like, if you watch that dispassionately as regard to the issues that he's talking about, which you have to try to sit back and be pretty objective, and if I'm objective about it, he comes across half the time as a dude who just kind of enjoys going on TV, going on podcasts, and trying to be funny, trying to be provocative, which I get. Like, you and I do that sometimes. And then the other half of the time, he comes across like a guy who really wants to be seen as a very serious political voice.
Yes.
And I just, it's interesting because last week we talked about how the personalities could be allowed to be made bigger in sports like the NFL, the NBA, instead of being so media trained and careful. But this is the other end of that.
Yeah. You and I both are fans of teams with some distracting personalities that have been on them. I had Cole Beasley on the Buffalo Bills. You have Harrison Butker. And it's exhausting as a fan, honestly. Like, when you're constantly just thinking about, and it's often combined with other behavior that's detrimental to the team. This might not be true of Harrison Butker. It certainly was true of Cole Beasley, where his sort of anti-authoritarianism also meant that he was talking trash about the organization and about the quarterback at times and things like that. And I think that weighed on the team more than the politics here, which is like when he threw Mike Williams under the bus and he didn't show up to OTAs as they talk about. And he's like inserting himself into the organization and picking players and playing GM and all that. People, Tom Brady didn't even do that kind of stuff, given how good he was. He kind of just showed up and did his thing.
Or if he did, we didn't know about it.
Yeah, I think we would know, though, at this point. And also as part of like
documentaries made about it and stuff.
Yeah, and Belichick was a pretty strong. He ran the team with a pretty strong hand, and you had to really work hard to figure out what was going on inside of that organization, because they were really good at keeping things under wraps. And I think I see this with my team, the Bills, is like, we have a quarterback that keeps his mouth shut and plays football, which I know, shut up and play ball is not a good thing to say, but I would just say, as a person who follows the team, it's refreshing to not know a whole lot about the politics of my team. And there's no drama about the team, which I think is more important than the politics. If Josh Allen has strong feelings about James Cook's attempt to renegotiate his contract, which is going on right now, or if he had strong feelings about Stephon Diggs, who is a huge distraction, no politics, but just all about him. He had the half of the Aaron Rodgers phenomenon. Josh Allen, when he's asked about it, you have no idea what he really thinks. And I actually think that's really good for the team. It's just all right, get the drama out of this building. Let's just have people who are focused on the football. If you look at what Garrett Wilson, for instance, you could tell he was exhausted by it all, and he was floating to the media that he was going to seek a trade if Rodgers was going to come back. And I bet you if you pressured Garrett Williams to give you an explanation, it would have much less to do with the politics than the fact that this guy, generally speaking, is unaccountable but very opinionated.
So, okay, let me play devil's advocate for a second and say, let's pretend for a moment that everything that Aaron Rodgers was going out and saying was something that we agreed with and we thought more people needed to stand up and say, right? For instance, I was on the side, and I think you were too, of Colin Kaepernick. Let's compare it to that, right? One, yeah, I do think, if we're being honest, that would change it a little bit. I think that probably a big difference. And look, Colin Kaepernick also was very willing, obviously, to sacrifice in order to make his point. He sacrificed his entire career for it. And where I think part of the problem Rodgers runs into, I think, two problems here. And I'm putting aside that his views often differ from my own. Like let's put aside what his actual views are for a minute. I think the two problems he runs into here are, one, he doesn't seem willing to sacrifice his career for it. Which I'm not saying he should, but it makes a difference, right? He wants to be able to go out and be as controversial and provocative as he wants to be and not have there be any consequences to his day job, which has nothing to do with any of that. And either way, no matter what your views are, whether you're Kaepernick's views or whoever, they are clearly at some point deemed by the organization to not be about football, right? But then the other thing is Rodgers does it. And so in this way, I'd compare him to somebody who has, I think, somewhat similar views to him, or at least is on the same side of the aisle from him, and that's Butker. And that Butker, to his credit, I disagree with what Butker has said. For the most part, Butker has done it during the offseason.
Yeah, I do think that's a key distinction when you don't mix venues. Like, I think if you're going on a sports show in the middle of the season and you're mixing criticism of the team and the NFL as an organization, I start to have problems with it. And that's actually where maybe I've revisited I haven't thought about the Colin Kaepernick thing in a while. But I do think once you cross over to like the actual venue of the sport, the day of the event, the sports shows, the radio shows, and all of that, I think I've changed a little bit on this, and I would be way more careful about this kind of stuff, not because of risk averseness, but because of the unity of your team. And I think like whenever you're going to do something, especially partisan politics, right?
Yeah, that's really where you get into the issue, I think. Go ahead.
And the protocols, right? Like he's criticizing the COVID. And here's the thing. He's criticizing the COVID protocols, and he lied about his vaccination status, which put his own team at risk at a time when it was not just the health risk of the players, but when they get COVID, they can't play either. Mm-hmm. And that's a huge problem for those people, that they deserve to know your status at that point. And so I think he did things that go well beyond being controversial politically and just being a bad teammate. And it's in keeping with other things he has done to be a bad teammate. And it's combined with this aggressive micromanaging of his environment. Like he has a lot to say about all the people around him and what they need to do better, but doesn't seem to hold himself to that standard. And I think no matter what your politics are, that grates on you. And a lot of my friends from Staten Island who are big Trump people, who also happen to be Jets fans, are exhausted by this guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but let's be honest. At the end of the day, if he had just played better this year, everybody would probably take the controversy and say, well, but he's playing great. And also it wouldn't have divided as much because, that's how it's always been in sports at every level. You can talk as much as you want as long as you can back it up. And he's getting older. It's harder to back it up. So it'll be interesting to see if he lands anywhere.
Yeah, you also just think about how uncoachable some of these people are. Like you go back and watch The Last Dance and you see Michael Jordan, who even throughout the worst parts of like the beef between him and the organization, he always saw himself as a member of a team and as somebody who still answers to the coach and the organization. And if he could do that, I think that really people should really examine that. Like you think about Mahomes and Allen and Lamar Jackson, right? You can't really point to moments where they've really separated themselves from their organization, or Jalen Hurts, right? Like these are people who maybe there's things going on behind the scenes, but we wouldn't know about them. Like these are people who stand by their coaches, they stand by their teammates. When both of our tight ends, the Ravens and the Bills, dropped critical passes, what Rodgers did with Mike Williams was throw him under the bus. He was traded a couple weeks later. Mm-hmm. What Jackson and actually you could put Kelsey in there, right? Kelsey getting criticism, Super Bowl. You stand by your teammates, right? Mm-hmm. And that's like leadership regardless of politics. And clearly he doesn't have that sort of that bone in his body. And I think that's a bigger problem for him than his politics,
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. He'll land somewhere because somebody's going to need him. It'll be interesting to see what happens. All right. Let's talk about hockey.
Well, okay. Here's the thing. You and I have talked about hockey. I'm not a hockey guy, but I think I think about hockey the way I used to think about country music. I used to be like, I like all music except country music, and now I love country music. The more I've been exposed to it, I have a feeling that if I were exposed to more hockey and went to more hockey, I would love the sport of hockey. I don't know how you feel about that.
No, well, yes. As somebody who grew up with country music and is constantly trying to expose other people to it to varying degrees of success, hockey does seem to be one where if you get somebody there live, I've been to a few like St. Louis Blues games, and they are a blast to see live. I have a really hard time getting into it on television, and the joke I've always made is that I would watch hockey all the time if between the fights they played baseball. So, but speaking of fighting and speaking of what's been going on lately, let's talk about what hockey seems to have done lately to get everybody paying attention.
Well, they must have been listening to the pod last week because we were saying we need to create more acrimony and drama both on the court and off the court. And there was a lot of drama in this Canada USA match. I don't claim to fully understand what's going on, but it's a 4-nation face-off. It seems like a little mini tournament
it's
between
basically part of their All-Star deal, right?
Seems like a better version of All-Star, which we'll get to. But there are a couple of things that happened. It didn't start well. It started with the Canadians booing the U.S. national anthem. Let's go to this clip.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ram.
So one thing I notice about that is that so it's being sung by a member of the Canadian military. Standing behind the person who's singing it is a person who I think is either a Mountie. It's a uniformed Canadian member of the service, either law enforcement or military. And as soon as the song begins, that person starts saluting, which is interesting because I guess for the Canadians, the protocol is like they're actually saluting the American anthem, which like in my time in the military, nobody ever told me that I was expected in uniform to salute any other anthem or stand at attention.
Have you ever been in a situation like that? Because I have a couple of times, and my general rule is I will do whatever the act is, put my hand on my heart, whatever, if I like the country, if I agree with its government. Like if the Russian anthem, for instance, were going, I wouldn't do that. But if I were like in Italy or something, I would feel fine.
But you at least like stand.
It's out of respect,
So, and the crowd, I guess it's over tariffs and it's over some of the stuff that's been going on. I don't think it's just a hockey rivalry.
Yeah.
But at this point, like that was some loud booing. And I guess what is the expectation for, viewing a country's anthem as a reflection of its people versus a reflection of its government? Like, how are we supposed to interpret? Like, how am I, as someone who didn't vote for the guy who's in office now, how am I supposed to take it? I'm not sure,
Well, I had said I criticized this type of behavior 2 weeks ago, but I want to slightly revise my thinking on this after having watched this, which is as an American, I'm very upset at that.
Me too.
But as a sports fan, I'm like, okay, this enhances the experience. I'm like, okay, this is real hatred. It's like, Estadio Azteca, I think it's called in Mexico City. Whenever the U.S. team plays the Mexicans, it's like a dangerous environment in a way that you don't see in a lot of places. Now, whenever you get to physical danger, I'm not cool with that. But everything short of that, like that kind of Yankees Red Sox hostility, I'm cool with it. Obviously, if we take it beyond that and people's safety is a concern outside of the stadium or on the ice, I start to get a little concerned. But they wasted no time here. We could throw the still frame on this. A brawl basically broke out immediately in this game.
And we heard from a lot of people last week who rightfully pointed out that we had this whole discussion about the lack of player rivalry in sports. And they were like, hey, watch some hockey. Like a lot of people came at me on social media about it. And then this happened. It's like, yes, I guess you're right.
And the NHL announced, per our theory, that the opening night of the tournament delivered the most watched hockey telecasts on TNT Sports this season. And the U.S. versus Finland drew the largest audience so far this season. So I think this gets to the fourth story we have, which is the NBA All-Star Game, which has been having the opposite experience here. I don't know anybody who watches this stuff. The ratings have been really bad. And even some of their own players are criticizing their All-Star Game. Let's go to this video of Draymond Green.
Candace goes, I'm coaching some team, and she's right, some team that no one wants to see.
Oh, man.
I had to work so hard to play on Sunday night of All-Star Weekend. And because ratings are down, because the game's bad, we're bringing in rising stars. That's not a fix.
I mean, it's interesting because you have the tug of war between there's a product you got to put on television and in the arena, and then you're also dealing with a competitive sport with a bunch of players who have a lot on the line, and like being in like a lot on the line in regards to the prestige that comes with being an all-star. And it's interesting to watch those two things compete with one another.
Well, Bill Simmons had a good solution to this. I don't know if you listened to him this week, where he said they should only send to the All-Star game. There should be like 8 or 9 players on each team, and they should only be from certain top seeds. And the winner of the game should get the top seed heading into the finals, so that they get home court advantage in Game 7, so that there's real stakes. And that also, like, and he also said that if you get an invitation and you don't have an injury, and you decline in any given year to go to the All-Star game, you don't get invited back. And I think that these are good solutions. The second one is less important to me than the first, where I like the idea of attaching stakes to the All-Star game.
Okay, so I have a totally different solution to it, because they tried that a few years ago in baseball. Like for several years in baseball, the All-Star game, they played it like it mattered because it determined home field advantage in the World Series. And it did get some guys to really go hard for a bit. But then it also became like, okay, you've got teams that make it to the World Series, like as wild cards, like what's their incentive to, once, like, let's say you've got the 1 seed in your league in the bag, like, why are you going to still continue to try to win games? Right. So here's my thinking. I think about the in-season tournament. Actually, before we do this, let's go to the Kobe clip, the old Kobe clip, where he's talking about what people want to see in the All-Star game.
I think the All-Star game in general needs a little revamping, because it used to be competitive.
Yeah.
It used to be competitive, and fans want to see the best pickup game in the world. That's what this is. They don't want to see you running up and down and dunking and doing all this crazy. Like, they want to see what happens when you get this collection of best basketball players on the planet, and they play and they go head up against each other.
Man.
I mean, you guys play harder at a pickup game in UCLA.
For real.
And ain't billions of people watching.
For real.
Definitely do.
You know what I'm saying?
Definitely do.
They got to turn
the
it
All-Star
up.
game needs a little changing. I always love competing in them. I didn't lose many of them.
Nah,
me and CP used to talk all the time.
One of the
like,
ones. You took it serious.
Yeah, we went. Like, I don't think me and CP, when we played together in the All-Star game, I don't think we've ever lost a game.
Yeah.
And we used to look at each other and say, okay,
going serious. They don't want to play, we gonna play.
Fourth quarter, let's go get them.
So this made me think like about the in-season tournament, and they've really made that matter. Like, there's the players take a lot of pride in trying to win it, that kind of thing. And what does it have that the All-Star game doesn't? If you win the in-season tournament, I think every member of the team gets $500,000.
Yeah, it's either $250,000 or $500,000. I like that, and also I like what the players say when they're asked about it, which is, if you're LeBron James, we're talking about the All-Star game. If you're LeBron James, Addisu's on here for audio listeners. If you're LeBron James, what he was talking about is they were happy to, like, a lot of these players down the roster get the money, right? Mm-hmm. Now, I also think that, like, what was the best basketball we've seen in years? The Olympics.
Yeah.
And so we're past the point where the international team is going to be interesting. So what can we learn from hockey, right? It's nationalities, right? So, like, I don't know if it's America versus the world, or America versus Western versus Eastern Europe versus the rest of the world. I don't know what it would be, but I think when you make it about countries, that could be interesting too. So you could take the money part of it plus the nationalities, because East versus West, nobody cares. There's no pride in the East or the West. So a lot of these people aren't even from those regions of the country, and they probably wouldn't be on those teams next year. But over to you, Addisu. You're the All-Star game came to you this year. Did you go?
I didn't go. At the last second, I was like, I can't brave San Francisco and all the chaos. I wanted to, honestly, but I don't feel like I missed anything. It was just fine on It was just fine on television. And I agree, it's something's wrong, but they've tried everything. For the last decade, they've tried Elam endings and East versus West and drafts, and now this tournament. And ultimately, the players don't care. And if the players don't care, you're not going to have a good basketball game. The players cared about the Olympics. They care about, obviously, playoff games. The players don't even really care about the regular season that much anymore, right? So we're seeing the same thing just seep into the All-Star game. Now, to give them the benefit of the doubt, they also don't want to get injured, and this is their only break in, if you're going to have a deep playoff run, 7 straight months, whatever. So I got to give them a little bit of grace there. But ultimately, it's all about the players. If you can't get the players to carry, it doesn't matter how many gimmicks you run, you're not going to get a good game.
So that's why they ought to actually, and not that anybody watches the Pro Bowl, but the NFL, I think, was onto something with the idea of like, let's do it in the week between, the conference round and the Super Bowl. Like, if you were to do it at the, like, let's say during a break right before the finals or something like that, and you just like what they do with the Super Bowl, the players that are on the two teams in the finals are not going to be in it. But then it might be like, okay, it's the end of the season. Maybe they're too beat up by then. I'm not sure, but it would be interesting to then try it. And if you're going to segment it out by where people are from in some way or another, do it like the Little League World Series. Do it based on where you're actually from, right? Yes. So then you can have a team that's like Europe, a team, and then you can have, and then you can have like a New York or a Northeast team, a Southeast team. You could just each year you could change up what the regions are based on who the actual all-stars are. It doesn't have to be set. And then you go and you have like a short, like, and these short game things that they're doing, like, okay, make it like a real pickup game, play to 17, got to win by 2, go half court and then make it for money at the end, but also let guys play for where they're really from, and like maybe wear their high school jerseys or something cool like that.
This could be heartless, but maybe you bring like 5 kids, 10 kids from each region, and you bring them to the game, and the winning team gets like full college scholarships.
Then you'd be a jerk. You'd be a jerk if you didn't play hard.
Well, you could maybe say like the runners-up get some amount. So like either way, you get something, but the full scholarship or something goes to the, so that like LeBron James has to look this kid in the eyes and say, all right, if I don't hustle, this kid's not getting a full ride.
Or like your high school, like the winners, each of their high schools get $500,000.
Now we're talking. The NBA donates a certain amount of money to their high school.
Or then it's just a straight up game, just a straight up all-star game. Maybe you do it exactly the way it is now, but the NBA is going to donate $500,000 to, the high school of each of the players that, or they could choose which high school. So, because you could do it like it's going to go to a charity, but we've seen, people still are like, oh, well, it's all for charity. Everybody, it goes to a charity regardless. But then you're going to have like hometown pressure on the players. Like, no, we really need it. That'd be interesting.
Let's talk baseball, Jason. I see our story number 5 is just baseball. Basically,
it's starting.
Are you going to get me to care again, Jason?
Well,
I fell out of love, man.
So I decided I'm going to, not every week, but I'm going to try and introduce a reason each week why you should care. And then we can talk about whether that is enough. Right. And I think that for me, the first argument I make is that like, it is true that every time you go to the ballpark, you have a real chance of seeing something that you've never seen before, right? And that the game is, is complicated, and there's a lot of strategy that has to be learned. So I thought to illustrate this, to begin, we got pitchers and catchers have reported, I think position players are showing up in the next day or so. To begin that, I'm actually going to give you a clip from 3 years ago the first time True at 8 years old ever played in a competitive tournament. And this is a clip that they sort of set it up. And this is the beauty of baseball. You have situations. They had a chance to get to the championship game of this tournament. These boys had, most of them had not played together before. They'd never played competitive baseball before. And they had a 1-run lead with the bases loaded in the bottom of the last inning and nobody out. Right. So it's 8-year-olds. So the chance that one or two runs was going to score and they were going to lose was very high. And then this happened. This clip went viral, and then it went further viral when somebody saw it and added play-by-play to it. So again, bases loaded, nobody out. True's team is in the field. They're ahead by 1, trying to go to the championship game. Go ahead, Philip, and play this clip.
It all could come down to this. Bases loaded, nobody out. As the batter steps into the batter's box, his team down 1. A base hit here, potentially scores 2, and wins the contest. Ground ball scores a run even with the third baseman in. The pitcher is set, checks the runners, and delivers. A line drive towards first base. That is caught. Out number 1. Out number 2 as well. A double play. The throw comes into home. The runner from second is off the bag. The throw down to second is in time. A tag, a triple play, and they are headed to the championship game on the back of a game-ending triple play.
So, I mean, if that doesn't get you excited for baseball season or parenting, I don't know what would.
It still doesn't do it for me. I'm sorry. It's actually really cool. I actually was in Palm Springs last week, and I did second grade in Palm Springs, and I was driving by this field, and I just looked. I was in an Uber, and I was like, pull over for a second. And it was like, I remembered it was my baseball diamond. And I was like, it's exactly the same as I remember it. It's these beautiful like mountains behind it. I'm a believer. I have a Ken Burns-esque nostalgia and appreciation for the history and the beauty of the game. And as a New Yorker, I like to play wiffle ball and stickball and things like that are within our constraints. At the same time, I have very little interest in the professional sport at this time.
Okay, that was great. First of all, shout out. What position was True playing?
He was playing second base at that.
Wait, that was True's team? I missed that context.
Yeah, that's True's
team.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, I thought that was a random team. I missed that.
Did he or the shortstop make that last tag?
The shortstop made the last tag.
So he was, and the first baseman made the catch. So he was between. He didn't make either of the.
But that experience is why True said to me at the end of that, he was like, "Dad, I'm okay with leaving my rec team. I want to play tournament ball now." And now he's like super serious. Practices 3 times a week during the winter. His team, they got second in the state last year. I mean, he's a good little ball player now.
I missed that context. I just want to shout out True and his team for that. I missed that part. That's awesome.
I'm leaning in on this. Tournament baseball, I can get behind.
Okay.
And I feel very, very strongly that Major League Baseball should have an FA Cup like mid-season tournament like event that just adds some random stakes in July. Because the problem with baseball now, especially as I've gotten older, have kids, things like that, I can't follow it for 6 straight months every single day. Even too many games. Like basketball is too long and it's half the season. Like I would be in favor of shortening the basketball season. Like football, the scarcity, I'm sure we'll talk about this more on this podcast, and you guys have heard about it before. Like part of the reason football is so great is because there are 21 weeks and then it's gone, from February until August, and you want it and you want it and you want it. And I'm sorry, but it is really hard for me to get done putting my kid to bed and being like, I'm going to lean in for another 3-hour, or I guess now 2.5-hour baseball game between the Rockies and the, Marlins that I couldn't care less about, or even, the teams that I do like in the middle of the season. So I'm on team. Let's figure out a way. I love the tradition of the game. It's more important, I think, in baseball than in basketball and other sports to like maintain the records and the traditions, but like they've got to find a way to tournamentize the middle of the season between the dog days, between, May. It's exciting in April, and it's hella exciting in October. But man, those summer months are rough.
All right, next year when they have the World Baseball Classic again, y'all have got to go with us we went last time. It's so they do it all over the world, and then the semifinals I think are usually the quarterfinals I think are in Phoenix, and then the semifinals and the final are in Miami. And so we went to semifinal and final last time. And it's amazing. I mean, because you're right, tournament / off-season baseball, or not off-season, postseason baseball, are whether you're a casual, everybody can get into that. So, all right, we'll stipulate to the idea that we'll do that. But I will continue.
Come back next week. Yeah, come
case.
back. I'm listening.
All right, Ravi, take us into the deep dive.
All right, so Addisu and I follow tennis. Jason, we're trying to get you on the tennis train. The context here is that there's the new generation. I'm sure you're familiar with the big three, which is Djokovic, Nadal, and Federer, and how that was the old generation. There's a new generation really dominated by two players, Carlos Alcaraz of Spain and Jannik Sinner, who's Italian, but he's Northern Italian, which I think is important for how he's received, which he's kind of an icy figure. It doesn't seem like a bad guy, but he's not the most charismatic guy, but he is the most dominant player in the sport right now. And so there's a certain feeling people have about him, which I think colors a little bit of this reception, which is that he's been in the middle of this story, which has been going on all year, where it came out months ago that he had tested positive for a performance, like a banned substance. And this was notable for a few reasons. One, because tennis has a strict liability policy under WADA. Like they use the same anti-doping agency as the Olympics do. So it's a little bit of it is like out of the control of the tennis association. And they have a strict liability rule, which you guys are lawyers, you get it. Like it means for the audience, that means that your knowledge and motive are irrelevant to the consequence. So if you use the substance, that's it. If it's in your system, and he clearly had this in his system, it was trace amounts, and it seems very likely that it was because of a hand cream that his masseuse was using. It's that little amount. And if you look at the guy, this is not the kind of guy who reeks of performance enhancing drugs. He is, he's a skinny guy who's not known for his power, right? So it doesn't seem likely that he was, number one, had a motive, that there was enough for it to make a difference, or that he would be willing to risk this for his career. But at the same time, there's a strict liability, and he was staring down a 1 to 2 year ban because of this. Now, fast forward to where we are today. He appealed it. He hired a lot of lawyers. There was a lot of griping happening while all this was going on, that the normal protocol is for you to face suspension right away and then appeal, which is what has happened for a lot of players. He has successfully been able to continue playing, and he has won major tournaments while this is going on. And it just came out that he reached a settlement with WADA to have a 6-month ban that neatly is right in between the major tournaments.
No, it's
3 months. That is right in between the major tournaments. He misses no majors. He comes back in time for Rome, which is his home tournament, which is preparation for the French Open. I'm mentioning all of this because the tennis world has erupted, and you would think that the Players Association in tennis, which is a new organization, and the players would want more lenient policies in general, because they're like labor, and generally labor organizations look out for their people. But to a player, almost everybody's complaining about this, saying that there's unequal treatment, and seeming to apply that he should have gotten a more stringent penalty. Addisu, I know you've probably been following this. Do you have anything else to add to that?
No, good summary. I mean, it's worth noting he has won the last 2 majors while this was pending, right? So he is clearly the number one player in the world. Clearly, I mean, he's 22 years old, 23. I don't know. He's very young. And so he's just scratching the surface. And I think the belief is he and Alcaraz are going to dominate the sport for a decade. And it's already started. They've won the majority of the majors between the two of them, the last 2 years. So some of this probably comes from that, right? Seeing that he is good and getting better while already winning multiple majors. But I don't know. It was interesting just to see how unanimous the vitriol was for him from everybody.
Yeah.
See some of these like standard. These are a lot of old guard guys. Kyrgios, obviously, we talked about him last week. A very important figure, I think, if not the best player ever in tennis, an increasingly popular one. And he's going to be the John McEnroe of his generation in terms of like being a commentator and sort of have a career past his playing career. But Feldnikov was a great player in the 90s and 2000s. Like it is old guard, new guard, current players, former players, pretty amazing.
Well, let me read you one of these tweets. This is Stan Wawrinka, who's a current player, really good. I don't believe in a clean sport anymore. I'm like, come on now. Like this was a trace amount. It's really hard to believe that this was material to the play. And I think this gets Jason to what we've been trying to convince you of, which is there's nobody pettier than tennis players out there. Maybe
well, there's no teams.
Yeah.
Right.
And when you're getting your ass kicked too, right? Like Sinner when he won the Australian Open last month, he kicked everyone's ass. Like it was like a thorough thrashing. And when you go on the court and you know that you're playing for second place, like I can see how that can get you a little more frustrated than you otherwise would have been. I feel like this is, I don't know if it's much ado about nothing, but it is. To your point, you have one mountain to climb, and it's this guy, and he's getting, a very conveniently timed suspension. Of course, you're going to be pissed for the competitive side of you, putting aside the, whether he was the letter of the law.
Well, it's a zero-sum game too for them, right? I mean, it's not like, well, I got my contract, I'm getting paid either way, right? I mean, at the end of the day, in tennis, you get paid for winning, and then you get attention and endorsements because you won, right? I mean, so it's their whole livelihood.
And it is. Have you watched the show, Jason Breakpoint on? It's the Formula One show / we've talked about it before on Netflix, but it shows just how much of a grind the tennis life is. Like you have to pay for everything. You pay for your own flights, your own. It's not like golf. You pay for your hotel rooms, whatever. And if you go to a tournament, you lose in the first round. Like it was probably a net loss for you, even though you won some prize money because you have to pay your coach and you had to pay your plane ticket and you got to, pay for your massage with your illegal cream. Like by the time you get through all of it, you got like $20 to get on the next flight. So it's not an easy sport to play. And only the top of the top people are the ones who get super rich really. So it feels to me, I don't know what you think, Ravi, but it feels to me like this is mostly directed at Sinner because he's Sinner and not necessarily because of the crime, quote unquote crime that he committed.
Yeah, I read two things into this. Number one is that he's not a clubhouse favorite. Like, I don't know if he's like a hated player, but he certainly doesn't seem to be a beloved player.
Well, he's new, right? I mean,
fairly new.
I mean,
if this were Alcaraz, though, you'd have got to imagine Alcaraz. I don't know who I would compare him to in the sport, but it's like he's just like your golden retriever, maybe Josh Allen, I guess in the sense that like he's just like, he's not like, this would be like, maybe Sinner is like Mahomes, and the way people talk about the Chiefs is like,
Otani is actually not a terrible, just like clearly great and also seems great.
Yeah. And people are like waiting for a reason to try to disqualify you. So, but the thing is, like with the players that I find baffling and where I would want to talk to them, including their Players Association, which put out a baffling statement, is be careful what you're asking for here, right? Because all of these statements seem to imply that they want stronger punishments. And I'm like, strict liability, what they should be doing is revisiting the strict liability and creating better appeal systems and more equitable distribution of resources. I actually think this is the logical consequence. What they just want is equity of consequence. And that's like a really important discussion, is like anything else in the world, if you can hire good lawyers and all that, you can maximize your hand within the system, which is what this clearly seems to have been. But in a situation where there was no intent to trace him out, 3 months seems like a reasonable suspension for that.
Also, it just seems to me that if even a trace amount carries with it a consequence and no ability to make an argument as to how it happened accidentally, how it was not intentional, doesn't that open itself up to all sorts of gamesmanship of people trying to sabotage other folks?
Of course.
Right? I mean, it
Well, the
feels
craziest
like
part
you
of
have
this
to
case,
have room.
his staff has now been hired by Berrettini, another player already. So because of the stupid strict liability policy, the staff members of these players, and this is a big problem WADA has generally. It happened with a Russian figure skater who's 17 years old, who's facing a multi-year ban for performance enhancers. And you're like, and I think she was 13 or 14 years old. So basically ends her career, and her trainers and her coach are still coaching. And you're like, well, okay, if a 14-year-old
in that case,
if a 14-year-old is testing positive for performance enhancing, that's an adult problem.
Right. Exactly.
And so I think there's a lot of problems. I mean, we can go into all the problems that WADA has. It's a really big problem. What's interesting to me is like in the US, we don't really use WADA for any of these systems. So we're, Addisu, correct me if I'm wrong. And so a lot of the stuff I think is handled privately. I think like these things happen all the time, I think, within American professional sports, but they don't come out unless all the appeals have been exhausted and they determine that after all of that, the person has done the thing. And then it's really hard. Like every now and then in football, you'll see it. Oh, X person is suspended 2 games for using a banned substance. You don't even know what it is, though. Like, often they don't tell you what the circumstances are. Yeah.
Yeah, they're policing themselves much more in the United States, which I guess, obviously the two biggest, well, maybe this isn't true anymore, but from an American perspective, it seems like the 2 biggest scandals in this arena have been baseball in the late 90s, right? And now like baseball is still trying to figure out who's allowed into the Hall of Fame, from that period. And it's all kind of gotten to the point where you just wish they'd just stop arguing about it and just make a decision and, decide one way or the other. But then then there's the Lance Armstrong piece. And in both of those, what complicates it that you don't seem to have in this situation necessarily is that the offenders in both of those cases are able to, I think, rather credibly say, well, look, this is what everyone was doing at the time. And the sport, this is what they argue, is that the sport was looking the other way. And so now like the, Mark McGuire and Sammy Sosa, that was huge for baseball, them going back and forth over the, for the home run record just a few years after the strike that really hurt baseball. And then, Armstrong, I think to this day still argues like, a lot of the other cyclists were doping. Why, what's the difference? It was a level playing field. This is argument. That doesn't seem to be the case here.
It's also long term. Both of those. Yeah.
Do you know what the steroid or the performance enhancer actually did or does? Because tennis is also one of those things where in this case, in the Sinner case, it's like even if it's trace amounts, like
I think it's usually when it's not something where it's a strength oriented thing, it's usually about recovery,
endurance.
I think so.
Recovery.
Yeah.
I'm not pro cheater, but like
he's 22, by the way. It's not his issue.
What are we doing here? Like again, once you get out of, there's a reason you have strict liability. It's clear. Clarity is very helpful in the law, but like, crises, you develop rules to respond to crises, and then usually the pendulum swings too far and you got to swing it back. And maybe this will be the case in tennis where they decide, okay, it might be time to swing it back a little bit and change the rules a little bit, because if this is what Sinner gets, the top player in the sport, winner of the last 2 majors, etc., then the system is broken one way or the other. You can think it's either broken too lenient or broken that it even became a problem in the first place, because what is accidentally getting a massage with a cream that has trace amounts of a recovery agent when you're 21 years old and hyper talented even going to do for you?
Right. I think it was Gladwell who said that sports is the willing acceptance of artificial constraints. Like, why is a football field 100 yards or whatever? It's like people will be like, well, if it's this little amount or that little amount, whatever. I get all that. I just think there should be proportionality. I don't have an issue with a consequence. I just think like the idea that you would take the best player in the sport out for a year or two based on what almost every reasonable person would agree is like relatively like benign circumstances. It just feels like a lot. And But to the baseball and cycling example, like I think in the narrow cases, in both those cases, ratings go up, the sport does well. But I think in the long term, it harms the sport.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with this as we go into the future. I know we're about to talk about like this idea for the enhanced games, but when you think about what we're all going to want in the future, right? Why do we believe that sports are going to be an ever increasing entertainment commodity? Well, because of AI, because of automation, because we're increasingly living in a world where less and less of what we see from an entertainment perspective is real and genuine and 100% human. And so the question is that going to put an even greater emphasis on, natural as well, right? Like when I have no interest in 20 years in watching, a baseball game played by robots. I have no doubt that in 20 years, they're going to have like Boston Robotics or whatever they're called is going to have robots that they can develop that can hit the ball farther and be more hand-eye coordinated than human beings, but it won't be interesting to me. I won't want to watch it. And so I just kind of wonder what that means for the requirement to make sports even more clean or if it does at all.
I think strict enforcement of this stuff and very thorough investigations is good. I just think that like reasonable explanations that it's not gamesmanship is good. Like everybody who gets caught has an explanation. So stipulated. I just think some explanations make more sense to me than others. Everybody says it was accidental and yada, yada. So I get why strict liability exists because there's not a single person who was caught who was like, you know what? You got me. I was trying to, so like that, I get all that kind of stuff. And you talk about the enhanced games. I just think this stuff has very limited legs. Like I think to my theory that I posited 2 weeks ago, there's only room for one sport per sport. Like I think like people are not going to watch 2 football games, like 2 football leagues. We've tried this so many different times. They're not going to watch 2 baseball leagues. They're not going to watch 2 basketball leagues. They generally accept whatever the constraints are. The only exception here is bodybuilding, where there's natural and not natural, but nobody watches any bodybuilding anyway. So it's like, there's just no example here where this kind of stuff will be anything other than a sideshow oddity where maybe people watch it like the strongman competition on ESPN once a year and laugh about it and then move on.
So for those who don't know, the enhanced games, which nobody knows if it's actually going to happen, but the idea is that it would just have no drug testing. So the Australian-born president of the games, Aaron Addisu, insists that Australians and Olympic gold medalists are among hundreds of athletes who want to compete in the event. Some have started to come forward, including 3-time Australian Olympic medalist James Magnussen and former 3-time gold medalist Liesl Jones. Donald Trump Jr.'s fund, his venture fund, has helped lead to a multi-million-dollar Series B for the enhanced games. The organization's posted a new video to its website. I think let's go ahead. And Peter Thiel is involved. Let's go ahead and play this video.
The media has claimed the enhanced games aren't possible. But in Trump's America,
the impossible is what we do best.
Today, Donald Trump Jr., Chris Buskirk, and Omid Malik's 1789 Capital join other leading investors in funding the enhanced games, a new Olympics for a new golden age. We are enhanced. The impossible is what we do best.
Okay, I don't know about you. But yeah, like, I see your eyes, Addisu. This feels to me like it's like a not a parody, but like a sort of Brave New World. Like if you were to watch it, like the next Blade Runner movie would have this promo in it. It feels like dystopian future stuff.
It's literally just we have no drug testing, so people can do whatever they want. I mean, I'm with you, Jason. Like, in no way is that interesting to me because the fun of sports is people competing on a level playing field and seeing who's the best, fastest, whatever it might be. And if your whole selling point is this is not a level playing field, what are we doing here? You can do it as to your point, you can do it as bodybuilding or as some kind of performance. I would be that okay, I guess. Like, watch this guy run a sub 9 100 meters on hopped up on every drug possible. But you can't do a competition with that because it's not a level playing field. And so, to the point about Sinner, I think what it comes down to is that I don't think it really was not a level playing field with Sinner doing whatever he did. Even if he did it on purpose, like, it doesn't feel like egregious enough to be like you get a 2-year ban. That is pure. It's declaratively a level playing field, and that seems it is both not fun and not competition. It's just performance.
At the end of the day, I don't think watching somebody who's using, steroids run a race against somebody else using steroids is that much different of an experience from watching two really fast people race who are not using steroids. I mean, at the end, like, I just don't think, I don't see the difference. Like, it's not like we're all tuning in constantly year round to track and field now.
All people care about is that everybody's accepting the same rules. That's what people care about, right? And I think you wipe everything else away, the safety of the players, yada, yada, yada. Everybody's hypocrites on this kind of stuff, right? Like, if NFL is a good example. If the safety of the players was our main concern, there would be a lot of things that would be different. What everybody cares about who watches the sport is that everybody accepts the same rules. What those rules are is totally up for debate. What I think is foolish is that there's this belief that there's just people out there just clamoring for a new duplicative effort that just happens to allow a different set of rules, which is all this is a different set of rules. Like, it's easier to score touchdowns if we're a 50-yard field. Nobody cares, like, nobody's going to watch that game. But I do think what this is a mirror more than anything else. The people who love this, it says more about them than it does about anything else. And this is how they see themselves, is like, they don't like rules, I guess. And they're, they like enhancements. I mean, there's a certain plastic surgery aesthetic that goes along with this too. Like, it's like, it's like
going to be 15 sets of veneers running a 100-yard.
Create your subculture. They get off on people like us doubting them. It's like, I am doubting you, but I also don't care if you succeed within your own little world. Who cares? Go do your thing. Like, nobody's stopping you.
Yeah, I just can't figure out what I would rather see them do enhanced. I guess combat sports, which they've got listed, but even that, I think it'll just make me sad.
That's the last one I would want to see enhanced.
Yeah, because someone's going to die.
Right.
And you're like, yeah. I mean, the one, I think track and field would be the one, because it would be cool to see somebody run a sub 9, 100 meters or whatever. I don't even know what the world record is of a mile, but like, run it under. But like, okay, you do it once and then what? Like,
Right. The cool part jetpack. You can put a jetpack on my back and I'll do it. So it's like, what is the technology?
It feels like it's not going to be a competition between athletes. It feels like it's going to be a competition between pharmacological teams.
Right.
And it's like, who can mix the best chemistry, which seems, you know what? That'd be an interesting docu follow, but I don't think I'd want to tune in to watch the sport live. So,
no.
All right. Well,
I'm out. I'm so far out. And I don't think it's to be clear, it's not gonna catch on. This is not. God bless these guys. Good luck, I suppose. But like, Ravi's 100% right. People like the sports we have, and the all natural one is going to beat enhanced games every time. So what are we doing here?
All right. So that's the deep dive for aging amateur athlete corner. Ravi, you fired a gun for the first time, I think, to go clay shooting.
Clay, and then I actually went after the real birds. Took down a few.
Spoken like a true hunter.
Yeah, I don't know what the birds were, but by the end of the trip, I was rooting for the birds, and I deliberately stood down. There was one bird who was really resourceful, and I had a clear shot at him, and I was like, I'm not taking this. Like, I think what I learned is that I don't really enjoy guns. That's what I learned. I don't like I was saying to our friend Jamie, who was his birthday trip, we were both talking on the way home. We're like, this is a lot of fun, but also, like, I could see easily why things like Dick Cheney shooting his friend in the face happen, because you have to be very clear. You have to be shoulder to shoulder, and in the excitement of trying to like track down the bird and all that, you have to be not only clear about where your gun is pointed, but where the dog is, where the guide is, and where your friend with a gun next to you is. And that's a lot of things to keep track of when you don't know what the hell you're doing. And so I left that trip being like, I am not comfortable with a gun. That was basically what it is. And I'm not sure I want to get comfortable with a gun. Jason, for our audience who doesn't know you, you were famously had an ad where you took apart a gun blindfold and put it back together. So you are comfortable with a gun.
Yeah, well, the Army gave me a lot of training, and even before that, I grew up. My dad was a police officer and owned a security company, and so I grew up shooting pistols, and I did not grow up doing much hunting, which is really the exception to the rule around here, where I live in the middle of the country. All my friends went hunting. I would go hunting with my friends and their dads occasionally, but my dad was always like, he had been a cop. He was like, I don't know, deer can't shoot back. It don't seem that sporting. It's sort of how I think my dad looked at it, and so I never really got into it. But I do, I have not fired a gun in a few years, but I will admit I obviously have a high comfort level with it and grew up around it, and have had a lot of training on it. That I do enjoy it when I do it. I go out, I target shoot when I used to go do it more often. But you're 100% right that it is like, if you are not practiced on your safety protocols, people get hurt very badly. And as somebody who worked in a place and lived in a place for many months where everyone was armed, you got to take the safety side pretty seriously in order to feel comfortable.
Yeah.
So
I've never done it. I've still never done it. I'm such a silly kid, but I'd be in. I think I'd be right between the two of you. Obviously, I wouldn't be comfortable with it, but target shooting, there's
the clay pigeons is fine. That's safe because you're typically not doing that in a chaotic situation, in a situation that has many variables. Like, you're kind of pointing in one direction
in the woods with a rifle where there's other people around and you're actually shooting at something for real. Like, I can imagine it being nerve-wracking, to say the least.
It's always
Jason. I'll come to Kansas City and you can teach me how to shoot a pistol. I'm totally in on that.
I could. Ravi, I guess, will be out on it, but I'm happy to teach you. And it's always interesting when I see the guys who are like, we're gonna go out hunting, we're gonna drink some beers, and I'm always like, yep, I'm out on that. Thanks. We won't be mixing beer and that. And it's also the cavalier approach to weapons is what gets me. Like, I can remember when I was in the state legislature, they would always have this bill, and it since doesn't matter because they've basically made everybody has concealed carry with or without a permit in the state. But back when it required a permit, they were trying to make it where anyone who was a military veteran automatically got a concealed carry permit, and they could carry without a permit. And I remember being like, hey, I was in the Army, so like, I get it. Now, I was an intelligence officer, so I was trained on a pistol, but most soldiers are trained on a rifle, and they may get to familiarization fire a pistol in basic training, but they don't qualify on it. And I was like, and then you got like Coast Guard, Navy, Air Force. You're just going to get, who I believe all three of those familiarization fire and don't qualify on a weapon. So I was always like, do you all like have some mythological belief in our ability to do this highly perishable skill? By the way, it was always fascinating to me the way people mythologize
concealed carrying a rifle.
Well, I had this conversation with Jamie on the way home where we were trying to guess the politics of the two guys who took us out, the guides. And what I said to him was, yeah, like in theory, you're going to be like, these are like super right-wing guys based on stereotype because they live in rural America, they shoot guns. But I said to Jamie, I was like, these guys were obsessed with my safety protocols with this pellet gun, Mm-hmm. I'm like, if I were to sit down and have a reasonable conversation with them, there's no way they think I should be handling an AR-15 or something like that. And that's a starting point of the conversation, regardless of what those politics are. And they could be liberal or conservative or whatever. But I'm like, these guys can't possibly believe that somebody like me should walk into a store and be able to walk out with any kind of gun, never mind something that shoots a lot of rounds really quickly.
They might, though.
But it's like, well, then at least it would be, or maybe they would, but at least
you're right.
The
conversation is there to be had.
Like, if they're that obsessed, and it wasn't just because it was their job, like they clearly were, and they, even for their dog safety, they knew that I was not to be trusted with that gun without a lot of care and attention. That's a starting point for a conversation, in my opinion.
That's a job that always fascinates me, is the person who has to, take things like that are, quite deadly and train, novices on them. And before we leave, I will share with you my favorite like indelible memory example of this is when I was in what was essentially basic training, and it was the day that we were supposed to qualify on hand grenades. And so before this, like we had been doing a lot of training with first with dummy grenades, and then with they're like training grenades. You fire them and they explode, but it's more like a pyrotechnic, like you'd have to be laying on it to get hurt, right? And then finally the day comes, it's like, okay, we're firing real hand grenades, or we're not firing, we're throwing real hand grenades, and you're on the range. And I remember coming up, and it was like my turn, and I'm not been in the Army that long at this point, and there's this training sergeant standing there, and he's got like he looks like he's on the bomb squad, right? And he's got all this stuff on, and we're standing next to this big barrier, and he's like, all right, this is the most stressed human I've ever seen in my life. I'm like the 17th cadet to walk up and throw a grenade with this dude, and he's got to stand with me while I pull the pin, pull back, throw it, and every time somebody did, you could just feel him be like, oh, okay, I lived through another one. Just terrible. The worst job in the world, man. So anyway, it's what it made me think of. But I will say, since this is a sports show, shooting sports, I think, are pretty fascinating. I don't want to watch them all the time.
It's hard.
But
I love the biathlon and
yes,
Winter Olympics.
amazing
Oh my God.
what they do. The ability to control your breathing like that. Like,
yeah. Whew.
Unbelievable.
It is. That's a sport. That is really archery. I know, obviously not a weapon like the same, but there's both skill and athleticism. It's pretty impressive.
I gotta say, like, I do every 4 years really enjoy the sports that are like clearly the original sports. They're like,
yes,
we don't need a ball, we don't need any of that stuff, we don't need any fancy stuff. It's just like, hey, stuff that clearly people came up with because they were bored. Those are like my favorite.
It's like Braveheart when they're just throwing the boulder.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, all right. Thanks everybody for listening. You can find Ravi at Ravi M. Gupta on everything. I'm at Jason Kander on everything. Addisu is A. Demissi on, I assume, everything. Thanks very much for listening. Sports are still important. Talk to you later.